He struck my son with a pointer hard enough to cause an injury that persists months later, Dr. Marcus Johnson announced to the stunned Harvard audience. The prestigious mathematics professor had humiliated his black son for asking a question, but had no idea who this father really was. When Professor Worthington challenged him with an impossible equation, everything changed in an instant. "I am M.J. Williams," Marcus revealed, leaving the room in shocked silence. But how could an insurance analyst solve what Harvard's brightest minds couldn't? And what happens when the true power dynamics are revealed? Watch this incredible story of justice, brilliance, and standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Dr. Marcus Johnson stood in his modest kitchen, coffee in one hand and a cream-colored envelope in the other. The Harvard insignia gleamed in the morning light as he turned it over with a mixture of pride and apprehension. "Jamal," he called out. "There's something here from your school." His 19-year-old son shuffled into the kitchen, moving with the careful deliberation Marcus had noticed since winter break. Jamal's usually confident posture was compromised, his shoulders slightly hunched as though protecting himself. "Parents' weekend," Marcus said, sliding the invitation across the counter. "They're inviting me to come see how you're doing in your freshman year." Jamal's expression darkened. "I don't think that's a good idea, Dad." Marcus studied his son's face. Since Jamal had returned from his first semester, something had changed. The excited boy who'd left with a full scholarship was now guarded, withdrawn. "Why not? I'd love to see where you're studying, meet your professors." Marcus tried to keep his tone light. "See what my tax dollars are paying for at this fancy Ivy League institution. It's just..." Jamal hesitated, wincing slightly as he shifted his weight. "Some of the professors there, they're not what you'd expect." Marcus set down his coffee. "Did something happen?" "It's nothing," Jamal replied too quickly. "Dr. Hayes had some issues with me in her introduction to analysis class. It's fine now, I dropped it." "You dropped a core mathematics class?" "Jamal, that's not like you." "I had to, Dad." Jamal's voice cracked slightly. "I couldn't sit in her classroom anymore." "Literally." "What do you mean, literally?" Marcus felt a protective anger rising. Jamal finally met his father's eyes. "Remember when I said I fell during intramurals? That wasn't true. Dr. Hayes, she didn't like that I questioned her proof technique. She made me stand in the back corner for the entire 3-hour lecture as punishment. When I started to sit down because my back was hurting, she..." His voice trailed off. "She what, Jamal?" "She struck me with her pointer. Hard. Twice. Said I was being insubordinate. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "She hit you? At Harvard? In 2025? "It's my word against hers," Jamal said, defeat in his voice. "And she's Dr. Eleanor Hayes, published mathematician and Harvard faculty for 20 years. Marcus carefully refolded the invitation, his decision made. "I'm coming to Parents' Weekend," he said firmly. "And I think it's time Harvard learned exactly who they're dealing with in the Johnson family." Jamal looked uncertain but nodded. "Just, be careful, Dad. Harvard isn't like the universities where you've taught. They play by different rules there." "Don't worry," Marcus said, his mathematician's mind already calculating variables and outcomes. "I've always been good at learning new rule systems." The Harvard campus sprawled before them, its brick building standing proudly against the clear spring sky. Students hurried across the yard, their expensive backpacks bouncing with each step. Marcus watched as Jamal instinctively straightened his posture, wincing slightly with the effort. "Does your back still hurt that badly?" Marcus asked quietly as they made their way toward the freshman dormitories. "Only when I sit too long," Jamal admitted. "Or stand too long. Or exist." Marcus finished, his jaw tightening. Have you seen a doctor? The campus health service gave me some muscle relaxants and told me to rest. Jamal shrugged, then immediately regretted the movement. It's been 3 months, Dad. I don't think it's going away. They paused in front of a building where student artwork was displayed. Marcus needed a moment to control his anger before continuing. Tell me exactly what happened with Dr. Hayes, he said. The full story this time. Jamal took a deep breath. It was during the second week of classes. I noticed an inconsistency in her proof on Lebesgue integration. Nothing major, just a small step she skipped that confused me. I raised my hand and asked about it. And? She didn't like being questioned. Especially not by a freshman. Jamal's voice grew quieter. Especially not by a black freshman on scholarship. Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. He'd faced similar attitudes throughout his own academic career. She told me if I was so smart, I could figure it out standing in the back of the room. When my back started hurting after about an hour, I tried to lean against the wall. That's when she. Jamal swallowed hard. She said I was being disrespectful and hit me. Twice. Hard enough that I fell against the radiator. Did anyone say anything? Do anything? Marcus asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. Some students looked uncomfortable. One Asian girl tried to speak up, but Hayes shut her down immediately. After class, a few people asked if I was okay, but Jamal shook his head. Nobody wants to go against a tenured professor. They continued walking in silence until they reached a bulletin board covered with flyers for parents' weekend events. There's an open house at the mathematics department this afternoon, Marcus noted, pointing to one of the announcements. Required for all mathematics majors and their parents. Jamal's face fell. She'll be there. So will Professor Worthington, the department chair. He's even worse in some ways. How so? He doesn't hit students, but he makes it very clear who he thinks belongs at Harvard and who doesn't. Jamal's voice was bitter. He called on me exactly once in differential equations. After I answered correctly, he never acknowledged me again. Marcus studied the flyer more closely. It says all mathematics faculty will be presenting current research projects. Interesting. Dad, please don't make a scene, Jamal pleaded. I still have 3 more years here. Marcus placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. I won't embarrass you, Jamal. But I also won't stand by while people disrespect my son. He tapped the flyer. We're attending this open house. It's time I met your professors. What are you planning? Jamal asked warily. Marcus gave a small smile. Nothing yet. I'm still gathering data points. You know mathematicians, we like to understand all the variables before solving an equation. The Harvard Mathematics Department occupied the upper floors of a stately building near the center of campus. As Marcus and Jamal approached the open house reception, the sound of academic small talk and polite laughter floated down the marble staircase. Ready? Marcus asked, noticing how Jamal had slowed his pace. As I'll ever be, Jamal replied, taking a deep breath. Just remember, most of these people determine my grades. They entered a large room transformed into a reception area. Faculty members stood beside poster displays of their research, while parents and students circulated among them. Marcus immediately scanned the room, his eyes settling on name tags. Dr. Hayes, he asked quietly. Jamal nodded toward a thin woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. She was speaking animatedly to an older couple whose body language suggested they were thoroughly impressed. And Professor Worthington? By the windows, Jamal indicated. The tall guy with the bow tie and the superiority complex. Marcus studied the department chair, a man in his early 60s with carefully styled silver hair and an expensive tweed jacket. Something about his demeanor reminded Marcus of academic adversaries he'd encountered throughout his career. Let's mingle, Marcus suggested. I'd like to get a feel for this department. They moved through the crowd, stopping at various research displays. Marcus asked thoughtful questions of each professor, demonstrating enough knowledge to earn their respect but carefully avoiding revealing too much about his own background. "Dad," Jamal whispered after one such exchange, "you might want to tone it down. People are starting to look at us." Indeed, several faculty members were glancing curiously in their direction. Before Marcus could respond, a commanding voice cut through the ambient noise. "Welcome, parents and students." Professor Worthington stood at the center of the room. "I'm Richard Worthington, Chair of Mathematics at Harvard. We're delighted to have you join us today to explore the cutting-edge research happening in our department." The crowd quieted as Worthington continued. "Harvard Mathematics has a proud tradition of excellence. Our selectivity ensures that only the very finest minds join our community, both as faculty and as students." His eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on Marcus and Jamal before continuing. "This selectivity is why a Harvard mathematics degree carries such weight in the world. We don't dilute our standards for anyone or any reason." Marcus felt Jamal tense beside him. The implication in Worthington's words was subtle but unmistakable. "Now, I invite you all to continue exploring our faculty's research. If you have questions, please ask, though I do recommend keeping them at an appropriate level." Worthington smiled thinly. "Not everyone here has the mathematical background to understand the complexities of our work." As the crowd dispersed, Marcus noticed several parents looking uncomfortable. Clearly, Worthington's condescension wasn't directed solely at them. "He always like this?" Marcus asked quietly. "This is him being charming," Jamal replied. They moved toward a less crowded area, but Jamal froze suddenly. Dr. Hayes was approaching them, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Johnson," she addressed Jamal, ignoring Marcus completely. "I'm surprised to see you here. I understood you dropped your mathematics concentration after finding our introductory course too challenging." Before Jamal could respond, Marcus extended his hand. "Dr. Hayes, I presume?" "I'm Dr. Marcus Johnson, Jamal's father." Hayes reluctantly shook his hand, her eyes narrowing slightly at the title. "Doctor? Of medicine?" "Mathematics," Marcus replied simply. "My focus was primarily on nonlinear differential equations and their applications in predictive modeling." Something flickered across Hayes' face, surprise, followed quickly by doubt. "How interesting. And where did you study, Dr. Johnson?" "My doctorate is from MIT," Marcus said, maintaining steady eye contact. "Though I've taught at several institutions since then." Hayes seemed about to respond when Professor Worthington appeared beside her. "Eleanor, I see you've met one of our diversity parents." Marcus felt Jamal's hand on his arm, a silent plea for restraint. "Richard, this is Dr. Johnson," Hayes said, emphasizing the title with a hint of skepticism. "Apparently, he's a mathematician as well." Worthington's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed? How remarkable. Self-taught?" "MIT," Marcus repeated, his voice level despite the deliberate insult. "Class of 2007. "Ah," Worthington nodded condescendingly. "Well, our field has advanced considerably since then. I'm sure much of our current research would seem quite advanced to you." Before Marcus could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Professor Worthington, I've been hoping to speak with you." A young Asian woman approached, offering Marcus an opportunity to observe Jamal's reaction to her arrival. Jamal's posture shifted immediately, recognition and relief in his eyes. This must be the student who had tried to speak up during the incident with Hayes. "Dr. Lisa Chen," she introduced herself to Marcus, extending her hand. "I'm one of the newer faculty members here. You must be Jamal's father. He's shown remarkable insight in my computational methods seminar." The deliberate warmth in her introduction wasn't lost on Marcus. "An ally, perhaps?" "Dr. Johnson was just telling us about his mathematical background," Worthington said dismissively. "MIT, apparently, though he seems to have left academia." Dr. Chen's eyes widened slightly as she looked at Marcus with new interest. "Johnson. Marcus Johnson. I believe the next presentation is starting, Worthington interrupted, checking his watch. Parents are expected to attend. It's in the main lecture hall downstairs. As they moved toward the exit, Dr. Chen fell into step beside Marcus. Dr. Johnson, she said quietly, I've been meaning to speak with Jamal about his situation here. Perhaps we could talk later. Marcus nodded, intrigued by the mysterious offer. As they descended the stairs toward the lecture hall, he noted how Jamal carefully positioned himself against the wall, avoiding both Hayes and the need to sit down. The morning's interactions had provided Marcus with several crucial data points. Now he needed to formulate his response, carefully, precisely, and with mathematical elegance. The main lecture hall was filling rapidly as families found seats in the tiered classroom. Marcus noticed Jamal hesitate at the entrance. We can stand in the back if that's easier on your back, Marcus suggested quietly. Jamal nodded gratefully. Thanks, Dad. I can't sit for long periods anymore. They positioned themselves against the rear wall as Professor Worthington took the podium. From their vantage point, Marcus could observe the entire room, including Dr. Hayes sitting primly in the front row and Dr. Chen several seats away, occasionally glancing back at them. Welcome to our special Parents' Weekend lecture, Worthington began. Today, we'll be showcasing the exceptional standards that make Harvard Mathematics the premier department in the nation. For the next 40 minutes, Worthington presented statistics about the department, faculty publications, research grants, and most pointedly, the exclusive admission requirements for mathematics concentrators. Our students represent the absolute pinnacle of mathematical ability, he emphasized. We accept nothing less than excellence here. As Worthington continued, Marcus noticed several parents shifting uncomfortably. The implication was clear: if your child was struggling, they simply didn't belong. Now, Worthington continued, we understand that not everyone comes to Harvard with the same background. Some students, his eyes drifted toward the back of the room where Marcus and Jamal stood, benefit from our university's commitment to diverse admissions policies. A tense silence fell over the room. Marcus felt Jamal stiffen beside him. However, Worthington continued, Harvard Mathematics cannot and will not adjust its standards to accommodate those who are underprepared. The language of mathematics is universal and unforgiving. Either one speaks it fluently, or one does not. Marcus maintained his composed expression, even as anger built within him. This wasn't just about academic standards, this was a deliberate attempt to discredit students like Jamal. I noticed several students standing rather than sitting, Worthington remarked, his tone falsely casual. While I understand some may have special accommodations, in this department, we expect students to demonstrate proper classroom etiquette. Jamal's breathing quickened, and Marcus knew this comment was directed specifically at his son. Perhaps, Worthington continued, looking directly at them now, those standing could explain to our gathered parents why they feel entitled to different treatment than their peers. Before Jamal could respond, Marcus stepped forward. My son stands because sitting causes him significant pain, Professor Worthington. Worthington's eyebrows rose with exaggerated concern. Oh. Has he registered with Disability Services? We follow proper protocols here. The injury occurred in a Harvard classroom, Marcus replied evenly. Under circumstances that I believe warrant further discussion. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Worthington's expression hardened as he realized Marcus wasn't backing down. This is hardly the appropriate venue. I disagree, Marcus interrupted. You've spent the last 40 minutes implying that students who struggle here simply don't belong. Perhaps discussing the obstacles some students face might provide valuable context for the parents assembled here. Dr. Hayes rose from her seat. Richard, perhaps we should move on to the mathematical portion of the presentation. An excellent suggestion, Worthington agreed quickly. In fact, I've prepared a special demonstration. His composure regained, he smiled thinly at Marcus. Since we have a mathematician parent with us today, perhaps you'd like to participate, Dr. Johnson. The challenge was unmistakable. From across the room, Marcus caught Dr. Chen's warning glance. I'd be happy to, Professor, Marcus replied calmly. What did you have in mind? Worthington's smile didn't reach his eyes as he addressed the audience. Parents often wonder how they might contribute to their children's mathematical education. Let's explore that question with a little participatory demonstration. He turned to the whiteboard and began writing a complex mathematical expression. This is a relatively straightforward problem for our first-year students. I'd like to invite any parents who feel mathematically inclined to attempt a solution. Marcus studied the equation, immediately recognizing it as significantly beyond first-year level. This was advanced partial differential equation theory, deliberately chosen to embarrass any parent who dared attempt it. Several parents looked bewildered. One father near the front, wearing an expensive suit, raised his hand hesitantly. "Yes, Mr. Worthington prompted. Harrington. James Harrington. I was a mathematics major at Princeton, but I'm afraid I don't quite recall how to approach this specific type of problem." Worthington nodded condescendingly. "Quite understandable. This material represents the standard we expect our Harvard students to master. Not everyone maintains that level of mathematical fluency after graduation." His gaze swept the room before settling deliberately on Marcus. "Dr. Johnson. Since you've claimed expertise in differential equations, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate for our audience." The trap was obvious. If Marcus declined, Worthington would use it to reinforce his point about standards. If Marcus attempted the problem and failed, it would reflect on Jamal. "Actually," Marcus began, "I'd suggest a more authentic demonstration. Rather than presenting a prepared problem you've selected for this occasion, why not pose a question from your current research? Something that might truly illustrate the cutting-edge work happening here." A flicker of annoyance crossed Worthington's face. "This isn't a research seminar, Dr. Johnson. We're simply demonstrating the baseline competency expected at Harvard." "Of course," Marcus replied smoothly. "I simply thought parents might be interested in seeing the faculty's work as well as the students' requirements." Dr. Chen spoke up unexpectedly. "That's an excellent suggestion. In fact, Professor Worthington, wasn't there that intriguing problem from your recent paper on topological data analysis that might interest the parents?" Worthington shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. Other parents were nodding with interest. "Perhaps at tomorrow's session," Worthington deflected. "For now, I'd still like to see if any parent can address the problem I've presented." He turned back to Marcus. "Unless, of course, Dr. Johnson finds it too challenging." Jamal touched his father's arm. "Dad, you don't have to." Marcus gave his son a reassuring nod before stepping forward. "I'd be happy to attempt it, Professor." As Marcus approached the board, he could feel the weight of expectations, Worthington's hope for humiliation, Jamal's worry, and the curious eyes of dozens of parents and students. Taking a deep breath, Marcus studied the equation. It was deliberately constructed to appear straightforward while containing a subtle trap. He began working methodically, aware of Worthington hovering nearby. After several minutes of careful calculation, Marcus set down the marker. "I believe this approach addresses the primary structure of the equation, though there are multiple solution paths depending on the boundary conditions you intended." Worthington scanned Marcus's work, his expression darkening when he found no obvious errors to criticize. "This is adequate, though not the specific approach we teach our students." "Mathematics offers many valid paths to the same destination," Marcus replied. "That's what makes it beautiful." Before Worthington could respond, a woman near the middle of the room raised her hand. "Excuse me, but could someone explain what just happened? For those of us who aren't mathematicians." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Dr. Johnson just solved a graduate-level differential equation using an elegant approach that, while unconventional, is perfectly valid." Worthington cleared his throat. "Yes, well, moving on to our next presentation." As Marcus returned to Jamal's side, he noticed Dr. Hayes whispering intently to Worthington, who glanced back at him with narrowed eyes. "This isn't over," Jamal whispered. "You've just made yourself a target." "Good," Marcus replied quietly. "Better me than you." As the presentation concluded, families dispersed throughout the building for smaller departmental gatherings. Marcus and Jamal found themselves in a quieter corridor, momentarily alone. "Dad, what was that?" Jamal asked, his voice a mixture of awe and concern. "You solved that equation like it was nothing." Marcus smiled sadly. "Not nothing. Just familiar territory." "But you work at an insurance company doing risk assessment," Jamal said, confused. "You've always told me you left academia years ago." "I did," Marcus confirmed. "But that doesn't mean I stopped being a mathematician." A distant memory surfaced in Jamal's eyes. "Those journals you keep in your study, the ones with all the numbers and symbols. That wasn't just hobby work, was it?" Marcus leaned against the wall, easing the tension in his own back, a sympathetic response to his son's pain. "Let me tell you a story I should have shared long ago." Marcus's mind drifted back to his own graduate school days at MIT. "When your mother got sick during my postdoc, everything changed. The medical bills were overwhelming, even with insurance. I needed stable income, good benefits, things academia couldn't offer a young black mathematician, no matter how promising." "So you left," Jamal said softly. "I took the insurance job, yes. But I never stopped my research. Nights, weekends, any time I could find after taking care of you and your mother." Marcus smiled at the memory. "Do you remember those nights you'd find me at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers?" Jamal nodded. "You always said you were working on puzzles." "And I was, in a way. Mathematical puzzles that kept my mind alive through some very dark times." Marcus paused, weighing how much to reveal. "Over the years, I published several papers under a pseudonym." "A pseudonym? Why?" "Because I discovered early in my career that papers submitted under Marcus Johnson received very different reviews than those submitted under my pseudonym." Understanding dawned in Jamal's eyes. "What name did you use?" "M.J. Williams. Generic enough to avoid assumptions." Jamal considered this. "So all those years while raising me, working full-time, taking care of Mom until she—" His voice caught. "Mathematics was my escape," Marcus admitted. "My way of maintaining some connection to the life I'd originally planned." Before they could continue, Dr. Chen appeared at the end of the corridor. "Dr. Johnson? Might I have a word?" Marcus nodded, and she approached them, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "That was quite an impressive demonstration," she said. "Though I should warn you that Professor Worthington doesn't appreciate being challenged." "I wasn't challenging him," Marcus replied. "I was defending my son." Dr. Chen's expression softened as she turned to Jamal. "How's your back doing?" Jamal looked surprised at her directness. "You know about that?" "I was there that day, in Dr. Hayes' class," she confirmed. "I reported the incident to the dean, but—" She shrugged helplessly. "Hayes has tenure and powerful friends in the administration." She turned back to Marcus. "But that's not why I wanted to speak with you. Your name seemed familiar, so I looked you up during the break." Her eyes held a new respect. "You're M.J. Williams, aren't you?" Marcus tensed. "What makes you say that?" "The approach you used on Worthington's equation. It resembled the Williams method described in the Journal of Applied Mathematics last year. A method that's been causing quite a stir in certain circles." Jamal looked between them. "The Williams method? Dad, you never told me you developed a named method." "It wasn't intentional," Marcus admitted. "The journal editor added the name after the peer reviewers noted its originality." Dr. Chen leaned closer. "What you may not know is that Professor Worthington published a scathing critique of the Williams method 3 months ago. He called it mathematically unsound and fundamentally flawed, though many of us recognized he simply couldn't follow the logic." "Dad?" Jamal was staring at his father with new eyes. Marcus sighed. "The insurance work pays the bills, Jamal. But the mathematics, that's who I really am." Dr. Chen checked her watch. "The parents' weekend reception dinner starts in 30 minutes. Professor Worthington will be presenting a special mathematical challenge, supposedly unsolvable, to showcase the department's prowess. And? Marcus asked, sensing there was more. And I happen to know he's planning to use your son's presence as an opportunity to make a point about standards and natural ability. Her expression was grim. He wants to humiliate Jamal to justify Dr. Hayes' treatment of him. Marcus's expression hardened. Not if I can help it. Dad, just let it go, Jamal pleaded. One more year and I can transfer somewhere else. No, Marcus said firmly. You earned your place here. You belong here. Dr. Chen nodded. The question is, what are you going to do about it, Dr. Williams? Johnson, Marcus corrected. My name is Dr. Marcus Johnson, and it's time everyone at Harvard knew exactly who that is. The parents' weekend reception dinner was held in an elegant hall with crystal chandeliers and portraits of distinguished Harvard mathematicians lining the walls. Marcus noted that not a single face in these portraits resembled his own. As families found their tables, Marcus and Jamal were directed to one near the back of the room. Dr. Chen managed to join them, along with two other students and their parents. Professor Worthington always sits at the head table, Dr. Chen explained quietly. Along with Dr. Hayes and the department's most generous donors. From their position, Marcus could observe Worthington holding court, laughing confidently as he charmed the wealthy parents surrounding him. Occasionally, his eyes would drift toward their table, his expression momentarily hardening before returning to his practiced smile. After the main course was cleared, Worthington approached the podium at the front of the room. The ambient conversation faded as he tapped the microphone. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, and promising students, he began. Harvard mathematics has a proud tradition of pushing boundaries. Tonight, I'd like to offer you a glimpse into the cutting-edge research happening within our department. Behind him, a projection screen descended from the ceiling. A laptop nearby displayed a complex equation that immediately caught Marcus's attention. This equation, Worthington continued, represents a problem that has stumped some of the finest mathematical minds for the past decade. It relates to predictive modeling of chaotic systems, a field that has implications for everything from climate science to economic forecasting. Marcus studied the equation carefully. Its structure was familiar, eerily so. While a complete solution remains elusive, Worthington said, our department has made significant progress in establishing parameters within which solutions might eventually be found. He gestured to the screen proudly. This represents the type of intellectual challenge that Harvard mathematicians embrace. It's what separates the truly exceptional from the merely adequate. His gaze drifted deliberately toward Marcus and Jamal's table. Some may find such challenges intimidating. Others might even suggest alternative approaches that appear simpler but ultimately fail to address the fundamental complexity. Marcus recognized the veiled reference to his earlier solution and the Williams method. This was personal now. For our mathematically inclined guests, Worthington continued with false modesty, feel free to examine this equation at your leisure. Though I should warn you, even our graduate students find it nearly impenetrable. Several parents dutifully took photos of the screen, likely understanding little of what they were seeing. But Marcus didn't need a photo. He recognized not only the equation's structure but also its origin. Jamal leaned over. Dad, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, I have, Marcus replied quietly. That equation, it's based on my work. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. You mean, a modified version of a problem I explored in a paper published under my pseudonym 3 years ago, Marcus confirmed. Worthington has altered the presentation and added constraints, but the core structure is unmistakable. Can it actually be solved? Jamal asked. Marcus studied the projection, his mind already breaking down the components. Yes, he said finally. But not with conventional approaches. He's baiting you, Dr. Chen warned. If you publicly claim a connection to M.J. Williams now, you'll expose yourself to his criticism without proper preparation. Marcus watched as Worthington continued extolling the brilliance required to even approach such a problem. The man's arrogance, his deliberate effort to make mathematics a tool of exclusion rather than discovery, settled something in Marcus's mind. Sometimes, Marcus said quietly, the right solution requires stepping out of the shadows. As Worthington concluded his presentation, he gestured expansively toward the equation still displayed on the screen. Before we proceed to dessert, I invite you all to contemplate this mathematical frontier. This is the level of intellectual rigor we cultivate at Harvard. Several parents nodded appreciatively, clearly impressed despite not understanding the mathematics involved. Worthington basked in their admiration, adding, "Of course, we don't expect solutions. This problem represents years of potential research." Marcus noticed Jamal shifting uncomfortably in his chair, wincing as he tried to find a position that didn't aggravate his back. Following their earlier pattern, Jamal finally stood, attempting to be discreet. Worthington noticed immediately. "Ah, Mr. Johnson, standing again. Perhaps you'd prefer to join me at the front where there's more room." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Jamal. Marcus could see his son's embarrassment, the quiet dignity with which he bore both physical pain and public humiliation. "Actually," Marcus said, rising from his seat, "I believe I'll join you at the front, Professor Worthington. That equation has captured my interest." A mixture of surprise and anticipation rippled through the audience. Worthington's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "By all means, Dr. Johnson. Although I should warn you, this is rather more advanced than the problem you attempted earlier today." Marcus moved toward the front of the room, passing Dr. Hayes, who watched with undisguised skepticism. As he approached the podium, he could hear whispers from the assembled parents and faculty. Does he really think he can solve it? Who is this parent? This should be interesting. Worthington gestured to the screen with exaggerated courtesy. The floor is yours, Dr. Johnson. Though perhaps you'd like to examine it more closely before attempting. That won't be necessary, Marcus interrupted calmly. May I? He indicated the whiteboard beside the projection screen. Worthington handed him a marker with the air of someone indulging a child. Of course. Take all the time you need. Marcus turned to face the audience. Before I begin, I'd like to make an observation about mathematics. His voice was steady, carrying easily across the now silent room. At its heart, mathematics isn't about exclusion or superiority. It's about patterns, relationships, and finding order in chaos. He turned to the whiteboard and began writing. This equation appears formidable because it's presented in a deliberately obscured format. The first step is to recognize its underlying structure. As Marcus worked, rearranging terms and identifying key components, he could sense Worthington's growing unease. The room remained completely silent except for the soft sound of marker against whiteboard. The central challenge here, Marcus continued, involves reconciling seemingly incompatible constraints within a nonlinear system. Conventional approaches lead to contradictions, which is likely why it's been presented as unsolvable. From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw Dr. Chen lean forward, watching intently. Jamal stood at the back of the room, pride gradually replacing his earlier embarrassment. However, Marcus said, writing more rapidly now, if we approach it using a different framework, specifically, a topological perspective that allows for dimensional transformation of the constraint space, the underlying pattern emerges. Worthington stepped closer, his confusion evident as he studied Marcus's work. This isn't standard methodology. No, Marcus agreed. It's not. But mathematics advances when we question standard methodologies. For nearly 15 minutes, Marcus worked steadily, explaining each step with clarity and precision. He was aware of the growing amazement in the room, the way even those who couldn't follow the mathematics could sense that something extraordinary was happening. And finally, Marcus said, writing the last line of his derivation, we arrive at a solution that satisfies all constraints while maintaining analytical consistency. He set down the marker and turned to face the room. Parents and faculty alike were staring in astonishment. Some of the mathematics professors were frantically taking notes, trying to follow his reasoning. Worthington stood frozen, his face pale as he examined the solution. This can't be correct. This problem has resisted solution for years. Perhaps, Marcus suggested quietly, because those attempting it were too invested in proving it unsolvable. He turned to address the entire room. Mathematics thrives on diversity of thought. Different perspectives, different approaches, different experiences, these don't diminish rigor. They enhance it. Marcus's eyes found Jamal, still standing at the back, now with a smile of understanding and pride. Sometimes the most valuable mathematical insights come from those who aren't limited by conventional thinking. A heavy silence hung over the banquet hall as Worthington stared at the whiteboard, desperately searching for errors in Marcus's solution. Faculty members exchanged stunned glances while parents whispered among themselves, sensing something momentous had occurred even if they didn't understand the mathematics involved. Dr. Hayes had risen from her seat, her expression a mixture of disbelief and growing horror as she recognized the methodology Marcus had employed. "This is," Worthington finally said, his voice uncharacteristically weak, "this appears to follow the controversial Williams method, which has been extensively criticized in the literature." "Yes," Marcus acknowledged calmly. "Though I'd argue those criticisms reflected a misunderstanding of the core principles rather than actual flaws in the method itself." A young professor from the back of the room raised his hand. "Excuse me, but are you claiming familiarity with M.J. Williams's work?" "More than familiarity," Marcus replied. He took a deep breath, aware that what he was about to say would irreversibly change his relationship with the academic world he'd left behind years ago. "I am M.J. Williams." The room erupted in murmurs. Worthington's face flushed dark red. "That's impossible. Williams is a respected, if somewhat unorthodox, theorist who has published extensively in top journals. You're an insurance analyst." "I'm both," Marcus stated simply. "When I left academia to care for my family, I continued my research independently. Publishing under a pseudonym allowed my work to be judged on its merits rather than my credentials or identity." Dr. Chen had moved to stand beside Jamal, her expression vindicated. Several other faculty members were frantically searching on their phones, presumably looking up Williams's publications. "I don't believe you," Worthington declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "Anyone could claim to be a pseudonymous author." A silver-haired woman whom Marcus recognized as Dean Patricia Morgan stood up from a table near the front. "This is easily verified, Richard. M.J. Williams would know details about the peer review process for his publications that only the actual author would know." Her intervention surprised everyone, including Marcus. The dean turned toward him with keen interest. "Dr. Johnson, could you tell us about the reviewer comments on your 2020 paper in the Transactions of the American Mathematical Society? Specifically, what was the primary objection raised by the second reviewer that you addressed in your revision?" Marcus smiled, grateful for the perfect question. "The second reviewer questioned my treatment of boundary conditions in a quasi-periodic case. They suggested my approach would fail for non-smooth transitions. In my response, I provided a proof demonstrating that the method remains robust even under conditions of minimal differentiation, which convinced them to withdraw their objection." Dean Morgan nodded slowly. "That is correct," she confirmed, looking directly at Worthington. "I know because I was that second reviewer." The revelation sent another wave of astonishment through the room. Worthington's face had gone from red to ashen. "Furthermore," the dean continued, "I've long suspected Williams's identity was protected for precisely the reasons Dr. Johnson suggests. His work was too revolutionary to be judged fairly if traditional biases entered the equation." She turned to address the entire room. "What we've witnessed tonight is extraordinary. Dr. Johnson has not only solved a problem that Professor Worthington presented as essentially unsolvable, but he's done so using a method that Professor Worthington himself publicly dismissed as fundamentally flawed in his recent critique." All eyes returned to Worthington, who stood speechless beside the whiteboard. His carefully constructed aura of intellectual superiority was crumbling visibly. Dr. Hayes attempted to salvage the situation. "Even if Dr. Johnson is M.J. Williams, one successful solution doesn't validate an entire methodological approach that contradicts established." "Actually," Dr. Chen interrupted, her tablet in hand, "according to citation metrics, the Williams method has been successfully applied in 17 independent studies across 4 fields, including 2 that directly contradicted Professor Worthington's critique. She looked up, adding pointedly, all of which was noted in the literature well before tonight. Marcus hadn't expected this level of support. He'd prepared himself for dismissal and skepticism, not vindication. His eyes found Jamal, who was now grinning openly despite his discomfort. Dr. Johnson, Dean Morgan said, or perhaps I should say Dr. Williams, Harvard Mathematics would be honored if you would consider giving a guest lecture series on your methodology. Worthington finally found his voice. Dean Morgan, this is highly irregular. We can't possibly, Professor Worthington, the dean cut him off firmly, I believe you've dominated enough of the conversation this evening. Dr. Johnson has demonstrated extraordinary mathematical insight and resolved a problem you presented as essentially impossible. I suggest you take this opportunity to listen and learn. The room fell silent again as all eyes turned to Marcus, waiting for his response to the dean's invitation. I appreciate the invitation, Dean Morgan, Marcus said carefully, but before I consider any association with Harvard Mathematics, there's another matter that requires resolution. He turned to face the room more fully. My son, Jamal Johnson, has been standing throughout this entire event because sitting causes him significant pain resulting from an incident in Dr. Hayes' classroom earlier this year. A tense silence fell as all eyes shifted between Marcus, Jamal, and Dr. Hayes, who had gone very still. Jamal questioned a step in Dr. Hayes' proof during class. In response, she ordered him to stand for the remainder of the 3-hour lecture. When his back began hurting and he attempted to rest against the wall, she struck him with a pointer with sufficient force to cause an injury that continues to affect him months later. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Parents looked horrified, while faculty members glanced uncomfortably at each other. That's a very serious accusation, Dean Morgan said, her expression grave. It's also completely untrue, Dr. Hayes interjected, her voice tight. Mr. Johnson was being disruptive in class. I asked him to stand as a standard disciplinary measure. Any physical contact was incidental and certainly not forceful enough to cause injury. There were witnesses, Marcus countered. Including Dr. Chen and several students. Dr. Chen stepped forward. I can confirm that Dr. Hayes struck Jamal Johnson twice with significant force after he attempted to lean against the wall. I reported the incident through proper channels at the time. Dean Morgan's expression darkened further. And what became of this report, Dr. Chen? I was informed that without additional evidence or witnesses willing to come forward, no action could be taken against a tenured professor. A young woman stood up hesitantly from a table near the center of the room. I was there too. Jamal wasn't being disruptive, he just asked a question about the proof. Dr. Hayes got really angry and made him stand in the back. When he started to sit down because he was in pain, she hit him hard. He fell against the radiator. Another student stood. Then another. 5 witnesses in total, each confirming what had happened. Dr. Hayes's face had gone pale. This is an orchestrated attack on my reputation. These students are simply retaliating because I maintain rigorous standards. Standards? Marcus interrupted, his voice controlled but powerful. Is physical abuse your standard, Dr. Hayes? Is public humiliation part of your pedagogical approach? He turned to address the entire room. The equation I just solved represents cutting-edge mathematical thinking. But what does it matter how brilliant our mathematics is if we create environments where students are physically and emotionally harmed for asking questions? The room was completely silent now. I left academia years ago because I saw how the system worked, how certain voices were valued and others silenced. I published under a pseudonym because I knew my work would be judged differently if people saw my name, my face. Marcus gestured toward Worthington's critique displayed on the nearby screen. As proved true when Professor Worthington dismissed the Williams method without understanding it. Dean Morgan had been listening intently. Now she addressed Dr. Hayes directly. Eleanor, please wait for me in my office. We'll be discussing this matter immediately following this event. She turned to Professor Worthington. Richard, you'll join us as well. As department chair, you had a responsibility to investigate reports of faculty misconduct. Worthington's face was ashen. Dean Morgan, I assure you I had no knowledge of any physical. Save it for our meeting, the dean cut him off before turning back to Marcus. Dr. Johnson, Harvard owes you and your son an apology. I would like to meet with you both tomorrow to discuss appropriate remediation, including proper medical care for Jamal's injury. Marcus nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions, vindication, certainly, but also a deep sadness that such measures had been necessary. Additionally, Dean Morgan continued, I believe your mathematical insights would be invaluable to our students and faculty alike. The lecture series invitation stands, on your terms, of course. As the dean spoke, Marcus watched Jamal. For the first time in months, his son's expression held hope rather than resignation. I'll consider it, Marcus replied. But my priority is ensuring Jamal receives the education he earned and deserves, without fear, without discrimination, and without having to stand in the back of the room. The following morning, Marcus and Jamal arrived at the dean's office for their scheduled meeting. Jamal moved carefully, his back still causing him discomfort despite the hopeful developments of the previous evening. Are you sure you're up for this? Marcus asked as they waited in the antechamber. Jamal nodded. After last night, definitely. Dad, the way you stood up to Worthington and solved that equation. He shook his head in amazement. Why didn't you ever tell me you were M.J. Williams? Marcus smiled ruefully. I kept my research separate from our home life. After your mother died, I wanted to give you stability, normalcy. Being Dr. Marcus Johnson, insurance analyst and father, seemed more important than being M.J. Williams, mathematician. But you could have been teaching at places like Harvard all this time, Jamal said. Maybe. But then I might have missed watching you grow up. Marcus squeezed his son's shoulder gently. No equation could ever be worth that. The door opened, and Dean Morgan appeared. Dr. Johnson, Jamal, please come in. They entered a spacious office with large windows overlooking the Harvard campus. To their surprise, Dr. Hayes was already seated inside, looking considerably less composed than usual. I've asked Dr. Hayes to join us for the first part of our meeting, Dean Morgan explained. I believe there are matters that need to be addressed directly. Marcus nodded, keeping his expression neutral as he and Jamal took their seats. Jamal shifted uncomfortably, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate his injury. Dr. Hayes, the dean began formally, you have something to say to Mr. Johnson. Hayes looked up, her eyes briefly meeting Jamal's before darting away. I wish to apologize for my behavior in class earlier this year. My actions were unprofessional and harmful. Her voice was strained, each word seeming to cost her considerable effort. And? Dean Morgan prompted. Hayes swallowed hard. And I acknowledge that I struck you with a pointer when you attempted to alleviate your discomfort during the enforced standing. This was completely unacceptable. Jamal remained silent, his expression carefully controlled. Furthermore, Hayes continued, I recognize that my behavior reflected biases that have no place in education. My treatment of you was influenced by assumptions that I made based on factors other than your academic performance. Racial biases, Dr. Hayes, Dean Morgan clarified firmly. Let's be explicit. Hayes nodded stiffly. Yes. Racial biases that I have not adequately examined in myself. Marcus studied the woman who had caused his son such pain. Her remorse seemed genuine, if uncomfortable. What happens now? He asked, directing the question to Dean Morgan. Dr. Hayes has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, the dean replied. She will be required to complete extensive sensitivity training before any consideration of reinstatement. Additionally, all her student evaluations and grading patterns over the past 5 years will be reviewed for evidence of systematic bias. Hayes looked down at her hands. I've also withdrawn my critique of Mr. Johnson's mathematical approach in my own classes. It was based on an incomplete understanding. Marcus nodded slowly, acknowledging the concession. As for Professor Worthington, Dean Morgan continued, he has been removed as department chair, effective immediately. His public criticism of the Williams method will be formally retracted, with an acknowledgement of its mathematically valid foundations. She turned to Jamal. Most importantly, we want to ensure your well-being and academic success, Mr. Johnson. The university will cover all medical expenses related to your injury, including physical therapy. You'll also receive appropriate accommodations for your classes while you recover. And beyond that, the dean added, I believe Harvard owes you an opportunity to rebuild your academic experience on more positive terms. Jamal looked thoughtful. I do want to continue at Harvard. Despite everything, the educational opportunities here are exceptional. I'm glad to hear that, Dean Morgan said with genuine warmth. And I hope you'll consider taking a course with our visiting professor next semester. She smiled at Marcus. That is, if your father is willing to accept our offer. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Visiting professor? The mathematics department would be honored to have M.J. Williams teach a special seminar on his innovative methodologies, the dean explained. With your identity now public, there's considerable interest in your work, both from our faculty and from students. Marcus hadn't expected this. I have commitments to my current employer. We're prepared to be flexible with scheduling, Dean Morgan assured him. Perhaps one seminar per week. This would allow you to maintain your current position while sharing your insights with the next generation of mathematicians. The offer was tempting. After years of working in isolation, the prospect of teaching again, of engaging with bright minds eager to explore new mathematical frontiers. He glanced at Jamal, whose expression had brightened considerably. What do you think? I think, Jamal said with a growing smile, that Harvard students should learn from the best. And after last night, there's no doubt who that is. 6 months later, the Harvard Mathematics Department lecture hall was filled to capacity. Students sat shoulder to shoulder, many forced to stand along the walls, voluntarily, this time, to attend the final session of the semester's most talked-about seminar, Innovative Approaches to Nonlinear Systems, taught by visiting Professor Dr. Marcus Johnson. At the back of the room, Jamal watched with pride as his father guided the class through a complex proof. Marcus moved confidently across the stage, his enthusiasm for the material evident in every gesture. The students were completely engaged, hands shooting up whenever he paused for questions. The beauty of mathematics, Marcus was saying, lies not just in finding solutions, but in discovering new paths to those solutions. Never let anyone convince you there's only one valid approach. Jamal shifted in his seat, grateful that he could now sit comfortably for extended periods. The physical therapy provided by Harvard had been excellent, and his back had healed well. But the psychological healing had been equally important, seeing justice served, watching his father recognized for his brilliance, and experiencing a transformed department culture. After class, Jamal approached the podium as students crowded around Marcus with further questions. He waited patiently, observing how different his father seemed here compared to his reserved demeanor at the insurance company. This was Marcus Johnson in his natural element. As the last students departed, Dr. Chen entered from a side door. Another successful session, she remarked. Your seminar has the highest attendance in department history, even beating Richard Worthington's record. Marcus smiled. I suspect some students come for the story rather than the mathematics. At first, perhaps, Dr. Chen agreed. But they stay for the mathematics. Your teaching evaluations are exceptional. Jamal approached, and Marcus put an arm around his shoulders. How's the new study group working out? Amazing, Jamal replied. Having departmental support for peer-led sessions has made a huge difference for students who don't come from traditional mathematics backgrounds. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. Jamal's leadership of the Inclusivity Initiative has already shown measurable improvements in performance across demographic groups. The initiative had been Jamal's idea, creating study spaces and support systems for students from underrepresented backgrounds in mathematics. Dean Morgan had embraced the concept immediately, providing resources and official recognition. And Dr. Hayes? Marcus asked quietly. Still on leave, Dr. Chen replied. Though I hear she's completed most of her required sensitivity training. Whether she returns or not will depend on the final review next month. They gathered their materials and walked together toward the exit. Outside, the Harvard campus was alive with activity as students enjoyed the spring weather. By the way, Dr. Chen said casually, the department has authorized me to offer you a permanent position, Marcus. Half-time or full-time, your choice. Marcus looked surprised. I'm flattered, but my work at the insurance company is also mathematical in nature, Dr. Chen finished for him. We've discussed creating a joint position with their applied research division. They seem quite interested in formalizing the connection, especially given how your methods have improved their predictive modeling. Jamal watched his father closely, seeing the subtle shift in his expression as he considered the possibility. You wouldn't have to choose between worlds anymore, Dad, Jamal said softly. You could be both Marcus Johnson and M.J. Williams, officially. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then smiled. I'll consider it seriously. But regardless of titles or positions, I've already gained what matters most. And what's that? Dr. Chen asked. Marcus looked at his son with profound pride. Seeing Jamal find his place here, not just surviving but thriving and creating positive change. That's worth more than any equation I've ever solved. As they walked across the campus together, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them here. One professor's arrogance and another's cruelty had created an opportunity for transformation, not just for Jamal or for Marcus himself, but potentially for generations of students to come. Mathematics, like life, sometimes required standing up for truth, even when remaining seated might seem easier. And sometimes, the most elegant solutions emerged from the most unexpected sources. Dear friend, this story reminds us that brilliance exists in all communities, yet too often remains hidden due to systemic barriers and prejudice. True education means creating spaces where everyone can thrive, question, and contribute their unique perspectives without fear. No one should have to hide their identity to be judged fairly on their merits alone. If this message of intellectual justice and standing up for what's right resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share stories that challenge perceptions, inspire change, and remind us all of our common humanity and potential for greatness.